Thank you for joining Market News with Rodney Lake. This is a regular program for the GW Investment Institute, where we talk about timely market topics. I'm Rodney Lake, the director of the GW Investment Institute. Let's get started. Welcome back to Market News with Rodney Lake. I'm your host, Rodney Lake. We're kicking off today from the Innovation Studio in Duquesne Hall. Thank you to the Duquesne family again for this great space. Today is episode 14, and we have our first student guest, Will Ahrens. Will Ahrens, please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me, Vice Dean Lake. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Will Ahrens. I'm a senior studying accounting and finance, originally just from outside San Francisco, and really excited. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for being on the show, Will. So let's first talk about how you found your way to GW and the School of Business in the first place.
Yeah.
From San Francisco. So that's a long way, right?
It is a long way. And it was a big trek across the country, definitely so. One of the main drivers for coming to the Investment Institute, I mean, if you look back, I was applying to school over COVID. And so it was difficult to really
time
find
to
a
be
school.
doing such a thing.
Definitely. And so I didn't get to visit a single school except GW.
Wow. Okay.
Figured it was the only one I'd visited. It was a great fit. Loved being in DC pre-COVID, and said, why not? And so one of the draws was to come to DC to be in the city. And I also found the Investment Institute pretty cool, as there wasn't many other schools doing something like that at the time.
Okay, well, I'm glad that was a draw. Obviously, a little bit self-promotional for the Investment Institute, but we'll take it for sure.
Slightly.
Thank you, Will, for saying that. So let's move on to, okay, when you got to GW, your School of Business, let us know what you're studying. What are you studying here? And, what's important right now on your agenda for this year?
Yeah, so originally I was a finance major, really liked the accounting coursework and figured it was, in the wise words of Buffett, it's great to surround or to fill that in that level of knowledge. So picked up an accounting major back in my sophomore year, and now finance and accounting. And this year, I hope to complete my CPA by the time I graduate. So big things happening in terms of getting the CPA done, but it's a lot of work, but it's good.
Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
And now let's shift the focus just a little bit to the Investment Institute. So you've been involved with the Investment Institute for a few years now. Thank you for that. But let us know how that started.
Yeah, it really started back all the way in freshman year. In getting involved with the Investment Institute, a lot of it is the classes. So a lot of the students will come in, but they'll take their classes junior or senior year of their time at GW. So for me, I wanted to get in early, to have that experience as early as I could.
Yeah.
And so two outgoing seniors at the time, Ethan and Dasha, I'm sure they're listening out there. Shout out there. They connected me with you and the Investment Institute, and that very first spring I applied for the Venture Capital Internship Program, which I think was the only second time the Investment Institute
It was early days for that program, correct?
Yeah. And applied there and was placed at a portfolio company of Mr. Asper called In Situ.
Thank you, David.
So it was great experience working at In Situ throughout the summer of my freshman year. And it was a lot of fun, really.
And what did you learn from that internship? Maybe just from the whole experience of being exposed to the venture world.
Yeah, well, one, I think it was like the first connection with startups. And I love the feeling of nothing ever having been done before.
Nice.
And like doing everything from scratch was a great feeling. So at a startup specifically, I found myself like doing a bit of Python work.
Nice.
Doing a little more like business operational work, actually learning how to manage projects and launch a product from just an idea to an actual product that you could sell to customers. And so working at a startup, I think, was a great opportunity to have both sides of that, see a little bit of what's out there in the business, and then be in sort of that environment, very fast-paced, almost like a fire drill every day, which I really enjoyed. And I think it sort of set myself up to what I wanted in the future.
Excellent. So now moving on, what other things did you work on at the Investment Institute while you were here at GW?
Yeah, so I took the class very early on too. So sophomore year, the fall of my sophomore year, I got to take the Phillips Student Investment Fund. Really enjoyed the class and figured out I want to keep working for the Investment Institute in some capacity. So the following spring, I worked as a project assistant, helping sort of the more operational work of the Investment Institute. We ran the annual conference that year as well, which was big. It was a quant conference.
Yep, a lot of fun, big hit. Thank you for the help.
And
Aaron Kirshner, shout out, another name.
There you go. And then in my junior year here, I TA'd for the Investment Institute, both in the Phillips Student Investment Fund for your class, then for Professor Song. And this year I'll be TAing. We have 2 sections this semester and then next semester as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks for doing all that work. And so it sounds like the Investment Institute has been pivotal during your experience here. But now let's maybe pause and shift to, it's important for students to think about, getting experience along the way. It sounds like from our brief discussion before, you've had a great experience from your internship this past summer. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you got to that internship and the internship itself?
Yeah, and I think it really goes back to what I did last summer as sophomore year. I was working at a portfolio company at Blackstone called Health Edge, and it was a healthcare technology company, and I was working on the accounting team. And that was sort of my first foray into accounting.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the work. The team was really great. I found myself thinking, accounting is cool. I like the coursework. I don't know if I actually like doing like the accounting work in the day-to-day. Sometimes, and some of the members of the team described it best, it's kind of backwards looking in a way. Mm-hmm. And figured, okay, I like a little bit of finance. I like the accounting work a lot. And I also like being the proximity to companies, like how that experience at the startup gave me. And so I was thinking, where could I combine all of these together? And I was actually, it's funny enough, speaking with another Investment Institute alumni, Jordan, who gave me the term. And
another shout out here.
Another shout out. And he gave me the term value creation. He was working at an infrastructure, and he explained value creation. Okay, it's not just one thing to own an investment and be passive, but also to be doing the operational work, putting in the operational partners to actually make the investment better, or to drive higher returns. So I thought for myself, okay, where do all these areas come together, mm-hmm. and where does that value creation come together, component specifically? And somehow came across restructuring, and I think, okay, this is the place where I want to chase and where I want to be. And that's led to this summer where I was at Berkeley Research Group.
Excellent.
In New York in their turnaround restructuring group, which was a ton of fun.
And maybe can you talk about the day-to-day, and maybe even before that, let's back up.
Yep.
For people who are not familiar with a restructuring group, could you describe what that actually is?
Yeah, and there's a couple different parts of restructuring. So you have your bankers principally on one side, and then our Berkeley Research Group is considered sort of a financial advisor, mm-hmm. serving as interim management or taking up the operational know-how.
So for example, if a company is failing or has failed and is going into some sort of bankruptcy restructuring, depending on what chapter, yep. reorganization would be the most likely in this case. Mm-hmm. Berkeley's going to come in and advise the company and or take over management. Is that accurate
in
description?
General sense, yep. And then there's also what you described as the in-court process, but then there's also out-of-court. So working with companies ahead of time in sort of performance improvement or retail performance improvement, and just supporting companies along the way from the stress cycle to distress and then bankruptcy, which is the end of the line there. So sort of that all-encapsulating view of the operational, the financial, and really the value creation idea when we think of companies.
And so you learned about this value creation from Jordan Scheinkup, shout out. And I think it's important for, current students and really everyone to, we're name dropping today quite a lot, a little bit intentional because, these are all alums, these names that we're mentioning. And I think it's important for students to think about current students and alumni to make sure that they work and build their own networks. And really, our GW alums are, I think, ready to do that, even for current students. Mm-hmm. And I think, you're a great example of that. You're a current senior. You've name dropped a bunch of names already for alums who are willing to help you. And I think that's important, but you took the initiative and reached out to them. So thanks for doing that. So let's get back to the restructuring. So what appeals to you about restructuring? So you worked your way through, you worked on the equity side as an analyst in our classes for the Phillips Fund. You pitch Kellogg, just for everybody. But now you get to Blackstone, and now you're even more precisely, squarely on restructuring. What appeals to you about this type of business?
Yeah, specifically, I think there's two main areas. One is the proximity to actual business. Mm-hmm. It's one, not just being an advisor. I think in some advisory roles, you seem to be in the next room over, or advising on what the capital structure should look like, or advising an M&A deal, or looking at some kind of from the next room over. And I really like the proximity to actually being in the room with management and working on what a company actually is, which at the end of the day is either providing a product or providing a service. So I like the closeness to that.
Right.
It feels very real to me. And I think the second thing is that's sort of unique about this sort of advisory is the turnover of different companies. You don't want to be in, a Chapter 11 process long. So there's always something new to work on. And over this last summer, the firm does a really good job at making sure summer associates have a great experience, not just on one project, but on multiple different projects, to really understand the different, processes, and then just the different ways that a firm like BRG advises different companies.
And could you now maybe talk about what helped you from GW and the Investment Institute? What, the things that you learned here on campus, what helped translate into, doing a good job? I'm assuming that you did a good job this past summer. What helped you make sure that you did a good job?
Yeah, there's so many different angles to take it on this one. I think one of the things, and advice to other students out there at GW, take Investment Institute courses as early as you can. I think what really helped me is that I liked the work and I found it really interesting. Mm-hmm. And so even before getting into it, I was like, oh, this is really exciting. There's so much to learn about here. And that sort of curiosity, I've always found that I sort of do my best learning and my best work when I am really curious.
Most people are.
And so I don't think I would have had that feeling without being exposed just to a variety of different things. Mm-hmm. And the Investment Institute does a great job at that, especially in the classes. I think my semester, we brought in so many different names just from a variety of different industries, from short selling to equity research to banking or just working in corporate finance at a firm. So having that sort of broad exposure, I think, is the best thing you could be doing to get that experience. And I think it really helped me at the end of the line.
Yeah, and I think that's good advice for all students, is make sure you get out there and you really try to understand the market. When you say finance, people think, oh, well, maybe that means investment banking or asset management or sales and trading. And maybe that can be a very narrow view of the world. It's such a big business. It's growing, it's evolving. Restructuring is not one of the first things that people think about typically, but it's an exciting business. Another shout out, Jared Golub, who's on the Investment Institute Advisory Board, is squarely in that business at Marblegate. And so it's not something that people immediately think about, but it's a really big business. It's a fun business if you like that type of discipline. And I think it's just up to the student to try to figure that out. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that you're saying this, that it's up to also the student to make sure that they get exposure to those things. Now, self-promotionally, we'll talk about the Investment Institute and come to our classes, and we'll say that. But even if you're not in one of our classes, which I hope you are, by the way, not just you, but everybody, of course, is get out there. There are different clubs. You can get, exposure to different individuals, alums, and connect with people on LinkedIn, email, whatever it takes. Many of our alums are willing to talk to current students. So I think it's important that you're saying this. And it's important for students to really take that accountability and make sure that they put the work in, but meet some of those alums, get some connections to different businesses. You'll probably find out which one that you like, and maybe it's going to be a little bit more nuanced than you had thought about. Yep. But with the different exposure, that's certainly going to help. So now, hopefully you can say you got the summer internship between the sophomore and junior. Now you got the internship between junior and senior. Maybe number one, talk about the importance that you think that provides. And then number two, maybe we can get to what was the outcome at the end of this summer.
Yeah, definitely. I think everybody, at least in GWSB or finance adjacent, close to it, understands junior year before your senior year, you really got to get an internship and the pressure is kind of on. And now with recruiting timelines being so early, you're recruiting for junior year and earliest your fall.
It's like the draft. Sophomore. It could be even out of high school at some point.
I mean, at this rate, it could be. So it comes earlier, and that makes it even more difficult to figure out, like you said, what you want to do. And so spending a lot of time on actually figuring it out and doing what you want and looking to do what you want to do, I think is the most important thing you can be doing. And why it was so important for me to figure that out. And once I identified it, to go and kind of chase it like you have to do. But the summer was great. Really enjoyed the work, and I'll be going back next summer at the end of it.
Nice, congratulations.
So it goes to show kind of, the outcome of this junior year internship. You could be in a great position to figure out or where you'll be going, or if not, what you want to do better.
Right.
And I think that's what internships really enable. And I know GWSB specifically really pitches that. Take as many internships as you can, get yourself out there just to have that experience. Because I don't think without, working in the startup land, what I've known I like this environment.
Right.
How do I replicate that somewhere else?
Somewhere else, right.
And then accounting at a healthcare technology firm. I really like accounting. I don't think I could do it, but I like it.
Yeah.
And then going back and using that to go to the next one. And so I think with this thing, it's a great fit. Will it be a great fit at 5-10 years? I don't know.
Time will tell.
That's kind of the beauty of it. And I think that's the exciting feeling as well. These internships really enable you to figure out what you want to do. And in many cases, which is just as good, figure out what you don't want to do.
Right. And I think that's excellent advice. You get the internships and sometimes it leads you to something that you want to do. And sometimes it leads you to things that, hey, I don't really want to do this, but I'm aware of that. And it's time to move on and find the next thing. And I think it's also worth emphasizing that these internships provide, these types of experiences early on in the process. And as you mentioned, the importance of getting these things done early.
Yep.
And I think we probably can't emphasize that enough. It's like maybe the NBA or Major League Baseball draft. They're taking students from high school in some cases. And so it's really important for our students to think about, hey, the recruiting processes for all these competitive businesses start earlier and earlier now. And it's a competitive market. And if you want to be in the place that's most interesting to you, it's probably going to be a competitive setup. So get the work done early, get those internships early. So I think that's excellent advice. And thank you for saying that. So let's move on to some general advice. You mentioned a little bit of advice along the way. So there's some things in here we've already talked about, but other advice that you could give to current students at GW.
Yeah, and I think it's one thing putting yourself out there professionally too. Inside the business school, there's so many different networking and just opportunities to meet other students. Which I think without that, this whole journey for me at least would have never started.
Right.
So finding organizations here at the School of Business that really fit what you're interested in. I know there's SRIF out there. There's some of the co-ed business fraternities, and really just finding
DSP
if you want
being
to
one shout them out.
And finding sort of the organization, the people you like. I think that leads to a lot of great outcomes. I think specifically in GWSB that you should be leveraging. Think about leveraging it in your personal life, and then here in your academic life, and then also moving out there professionally as well. If anything, and it goes back to what you said, it's just a matter of practice. I can remember at the very beginning and I only know this now retroactively, networking.
Right.
Like, it seems like, it's
everybody
really
says
tough.
that, right?
Everybody says that. And some people say, it's not more of a dirty word. You don't want to be networking. It's very transactional.
Right.
But, networking, you actually get to meet someone at the end of the day, and you can meet some really interesting people. And so for me, being genuine throughout the process and really understanding that I'm not going to connect with everybody.
Right.
All it takes is kind of one to get where I want to go, or just, to meet someone, I think has been invaluable to learn. I hadn't realized that until only a couple, maybe months ago after I was getting out of things. But it all is with a purpose.
Right.
And it's something you got to keep going through. But I think the best thing for me, at least I realize, is you'll know it when you feel it.
Yeah.
And you really got to trust your gut in this kind of things. Whether it's, you got an offer at one place, but it doesn't really feel right. Maybe you should listen to that. Or you want to talk to this one person, it didn't really go so well. There's probably someone else. So always just remembering, trust your gut, putting yourself out there. And there's plenty of people to talk to, and plenty of experiences to go around, I think.
So put the work in and trust your heart, though.
Of course. I think definitely.
And I think one thing worth emphasizing here is that many people talk about networking, and especially here at the business school, we talk about networking a lot. I think one of the things to emphasize, as you mentioned here, is that it needs to be authentic. And it's really about building relationships, as you mentioned. It's not just about being transactional and, hey, how many people can I meet in this amount of time? Or how many connections can I create on LinkedIn in this amount of time? It's more about, can I build some connections with these people that are real connections, that are authentic, and I can build a relationship with these people. And if there's a way for me to add value to them at some point, that's building a relationship where, if you can help them, that's wonderful. And if they are willing to help you, that's wonderful. And one of the things I always want to emphasize is, if you got help, not just you in this case, but any of our GW students, pay it forward. Make sure that you pay it forward, because you may not be able to pay back that person specifically if they helped you out. Made sure that you saw a part of the business that you maybe wouldn't have seen, making sure you got to some analysis, maybe you got a connection, introduction, whatever it happens to be, making sure that our students think about that consciously and pay it forward when they have that opportunity. So we hope you'll do that. I'm sure you'll do that, Will, and pay it forward for the next people at GW. So now let's move to wrap here. So what worldly wisdom, beyond advice, what worldly wisdom do you have for us or for anyone watching the show or listening to the podcast?
That's a big question. I think to take it back, and I know we're big proponents of fundamental investing, Benjamin Graham, Warren Buffett. Just some advice from Charlie Munger. Lately, I've been sort of more into mental models or approaching the way we think.
Yeah.
And trying to think, or not just say better, but more clear.
Right.
And I think there was one principle that I learned from him and some of his writings was to always invert. And using that sort of framework to look at different things has been really helpful for me. And it's been helpful for me to put together a little toolkit of little mental models that I can use to think better and think more critically, I think is important. So always invert being one of them. I think it's helpful in the internship search too.
For sure.
Always look backwards. And trust your gut at the end of it, at the end of the day, because that'll be your best mental model, I think.
Excellent. Well, restructuring seems like an inversion, so always invert. So I think that's a good place to end on. Thank you, Will, for being our guest, joining us for Market News with Rodney Lake. And now we'll wrap for the show here. Thank you again for watching Market News with Rodney Lake. We'll see you back on the next episode. Disclaimer, the content shared in the GW Investment Institute podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the GW Investment Institute or the George Washington University. Listeners should not act upon the information provided without seeking professional advice from a qualified financial advisor. Investing involves risks, including the loss of principal. The GW Investment Institute, the George Washington University, and the podcast hosts do not assume any responsibility for any investment decisions made based on the content of this podcast. Always conduct your own research and consult with a financial advisor before making any investment decisions.